All right. I want to introduce everybody to Indica Cook, who's an alumni of our program and has a ton of expertise in early childhood and early childhood special education. And so, thank you, Indica. Thanks for coming to chat with me. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about yourself and kind of what brought you to early childhood and early childhood special education?
Sure. As a child, I always kind of worked with children that were younger than me. Children always kind of navigated towards me. Just became kind of my passion to be around children and working with children. Um, I had a really awesome dentist as a child. And so I originally wanted to go to school to be a pediatric dentist. But then once I got to SFSU, I realized that science wasn't really my thing, but I still had a love for children. I kind of looked through the majors and I learned about CAD. And so I joined the CAD program and then I graduated from that program. And I was still working with children in the classroom, but I felt something was missing. I felt like that I wasn't reaching all children. And I reflected back on when I was in kindergarten, and with my kindergarten class, everyone was together. It was not a separate room, it was very inclusive. And that's what I knew. And that was from kindergarten through sixth grade that I went to school like that. But as I got older, I realized that children had to be separated, and I couldn't really understand why. And so the school that I was working at, I felt the same thing, that children were separated, that if a child was diagnosed with a disability, they went to a different school. And I didn't understand that. I didn't feel comfortable, and I didn't have any expertise in special education. So I wanted to learn more. So I went back to school and I through the ECSE program.
That's awesome. And can you share a little bit about where you're working now?
Yeah, so I'm currently working for Head Start as I'm a head teacher, and I have an inclusive classroom.
Awesome. Thanks, Indica. So with the as I was sharing with you before recording, that you immediately came to my mind when we were preparing for this class because we are trying to infuse the project approach throughout this class. And I remember you talking about it. I remember you thinking a little bit about it for a possible culminating experience if you'd gone that way, and also that you had just been able to work with others that had really focused on this approach. So you immediately came to mind just to hear kind of your experiences and expertise with it. So could you share just a little bit about how you learned about the project approach and how you kind of conceptualize it when you think about early childhood settings?
Sure. So I learned about it through professional development. It was just an option kind of to learn about the project approach, and I was first got a little bit overwhelmed, honestly, with it because it's a lot of information kind of to take in. And then I wanted to learn more about it, and so my boss applied for a special kind of program where we got to work with Lillian cats. And so working with her, we actually had to have our project ready. And then at the end, we were able to display our project to her. And so the project that we worked with at that time was doctors. I've done quite a few different, but I've worked with her and we did doctors. And so at that time, my classroom, to be honest, my classroom was a little rambunctious, if you say, like trying to figure out kind of what the children needed, trying to help some children, get the services they needed. It was a lot going. It was a lot going on, and so we thought, you know what, let's try the project approach, and let's see if that will help us to bridge the gap, to have everyone kind of come together and be a bit more cohesive and try to meet the individual needs of each child. And yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. What a cool opportunity too that you were able to just learn and talk and just learn from Lillian Katz too, who just is so passionate about this approach. So when you think you mentioned that you had done, other than doctors, you've done a lot of projects in classrooms. Is there one that you feel like you could share just a more specific about an example of a project and maybe just some of the ways that you kind of tried to do it within your classroom?
Yeah, so I actually can give you two. I can go back to doctors because I remember that one. That was actually really fun. I'm thinking about it now, and then I can also tell you about one that did not work so well because that
Perfect.
happens sometimes too.
Yep.
Okay, so with the doctors one, what happened was it started out with the children in the classroom, and they were in the dramatic play area, and they were, talking about, when I go to the doctor, I get a shot. And then someone else mentioned, well, when I take my dog to the doctor. And so that kind of became this idea of, okay, well, we started a web. And so we kind of did it circle time on the middle doctors. And then we said, asked the children, like, what do they know about doctors?
Hmm.
And that time we also had some children who were nonverbal, but were able to draw. And
Hmm.
so, I asked them children the same question. And so they drew kind of their picture of what they knew about doctors, and we added it on our board. And we also let the families know that we were talking about doctors as well. And from there, it kind of just took off because the children were just kind of different, excited about different things. But we had to actually tone it down because sometimes, you can get too broad with it if you're thinking too far out. And of course, as you know, like an adult brain is different than a child brain. And so as teachers, we had to put our what we know, our knowledge of what we know about Dr. Aside, and kind of really just hone in on what the children wanted to bring to the table about knowing about doctors. And so then we started to introduce we started to change our classroom around a little bit, adding in different little things of tools, dramatic play, just kind of see different books, just seeing kind of if that's really where they wanted to focus on and what they wanted to share. It was their interest, right? And
Hmm.
so from there, we were able to begin our investigation because they didn't want to do doctors. And so we did investigations. We went on field trips. We explored things that they brought in. Children had their own experiences about, going to the doctor and what that was like. We let sometimes the children lead circle time. It was really something that what we thought was something so small, they made it so big, and they really got involved all together and made it a community. Um, and children that usually don't do, even I had children who don't really do peer interactions, they would kind of, it's why you have the children who you're at circle time and you have that child who sits on the sideline. They're listening, but they're not wanting to be physically close to their peers.
Right.
But you started noticing that those children were coming into circle and wanting to join. And it wasn't something that we did all the time. And what I mean by it's sometimes when you think of project approach, people get confused with what a theme.
Hmm.
And so kind of when I think about themes, I think about that's something that we're going to do for a month. So we're going to just, we're going to study winter, and everything's going to be about cold, and it's every activity kind of has to do with that. And it's not really the children's interest. It's just that this month as a teacher, I'm assigning that we're doing winter,
Yep.
right? And the children may have a connection or may not have a connection. But with this doctors, I felt they had a connection, and it was something that maybe we have it at circle time today, but tomorrow we're talking about something different. And they
Hmm.
would just continue to bring it up. We have different areas of custom that they could work on. Um, and taking pictures. We had a lot of documentation around the classroom.
Hmm.
Just showing them of their work, whether it was their artwork, taking pictures of them and doing certain things. The children brought in pictures, and I just really think that that's the difference between project approach is that it can be individualized,
Hmm.
meeting the children where they are at, you know, um, versus kind of trying to put a curriculum on them that they are not interested in, or it may not be applicable to their everyday life experiences.
Very true. It's so cool when it comes from them, and just like you're saying that, like it builds a sense of community if they feel invested and that the idea kind of came from them as well. Just before you tell us about the option that did, or the project that didn't work, do you feel like it was easy when you're thinking about doctors? Did you feel like it was easy for you to hit the different standards or foundations that you were required to meet as a teacher, using that kind of a project? So for you, was that was that an easy thing, or did you find that challenging to be like, okay, at a doctor's, we can easily like demonstrate that they're getting lots of art, or that we're able to have them do dramatic play or so forth? Or how did you kind of go about that?
So I worked at a lab school. So kind of that was already kind of embedded in me to kind of be hitting the foundations with whatever we were learning in the
Mhm.
classroom. And so I think that it came kind of natural. And I think that oftentimes we overthink it. And so sometimes I would have to kind of look back at my observations of what the children were doing and saying, oh, wait, no, there was math involved in this. Or, there was some science involved in this. Whereas when I first saw it happening, I may not think that. So I think that it just kind of naturally fused together
Mhm.
during the during the project.
Thanks. That's good. I just know that comes up often when I talk to teachers that get nervous about it. And I think you're right. Sometimes I think it just requires you to really, when you really look at the foundations or look at whatever framework your program is using, sometimes if they're written well, hopefully they're developmentally appropriate, and they are going to be things that naturally are going to come out of projects like this too, or they're not horrific to try and put onto a project either, right? They're just like you're saying, they might already be there too that you can build off of. What's the
Yeah.
example of a project? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I have most experience working with like the DRDP.
Yep.
So I feel like the DRDP can be lengthy, but I feel like that
Yeah.
it hits a lot of points. And sometimes you don't even think about it. It's just like, oh wait, you can just check off the different ones.
Yeah, that's very true. What's the example of a project that did not go so hot?
Homes. We were doing homes. And so what came up with the homes is that it started out with the children building. They were building different kind of homes with unit blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And so my coach at the time said, yeah, I think that'll be a good idea. And so we started out and it started out strong. But what ended up happening was then we have to think about, well, wait, do all kids have homes? There's different type of homes. What if a kid is homeless? What if a kid lives in an apartment? What if, in a house? Or we didn't want anyone to feel excluded. And
Mm-hmm.
so that came kind of tricky of figuring out, okay, well, maybe we can study maybe pet homes, but then it became too restricted.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just seemed like that the children also started to lose interest in it. And so that's where it's a difference between when the children are kind of tired and maybe they need a break from the project. Because sometimes, like, you don't want to drive, like I said, we don't want to put every day in every activity all day, right? Because we want the children to be like, this is their project, take ownership, kind of more at their pace because we're
Mm-hmm.
meeting them where they're at versus us always having it. This is what we're going to do. And it's always, you don't want the kids to be like, not again. I've
Right.
had students tell me that, like, I don't want to study trees again. Like, why?
Right.
So, and also doing it in small groups, right? So with the homes, it wasn't successful. Like it was like we would try different ways and just like the kids just were not into it. And it was like reflecting back on it now, it was such a big topic that it
Mm-hmm.
was kind of hard to bring that down to children because it was like, well, what exactly are we trying to figure out and how much knowledge do they have in regards to homes? It's like, well, they've never built a home, so they don't have that experience. They've seen people and animals live in different types of homes, but we just kept kind of hitting that roadblock. And so it was a little bit frustrating, I think, for teaching team and also for the children. And so we just kind of took a break from that one.
Yeah, that's
That's
fair. I
okay.
like that. I like that you were still like, I mean, it feels like such good teaching, right? And where you are aware of something and then being like, okay, this isn't working. Let's go on. Let's figure out something else that they're more vested into. So when you think about ones that have gone well, like the doctor's ones, what do you think is really important when you think about ensuring that all kids can kind of access and learn and participate, including the kids that have diagnosed disabilities? What feels really important to consider or keep in mind?
I think meeting the kids where they're at. Like, like as a teacher, typically you know your kids in your classroom. Um, I mean, typically you wouldn't start this project approach, the first month of getting to know your kids. You would kind of get to know them first and you kind of see where they're at. And if they do have diagnosed disabilities, you would kind of, look at their IEP and see kind of what goals they're working on. And then
Mhm.
you can kind of see, well, where you can assist them, where they would need more support. So that's kind of goes back to talking about like the small groups, like I knew that some of my kids when they went to doctors were really interested in the dramatic play area.
Mhm.
Where I had other children who were more interested in doing, you know, artwork, or they wanted to write the signs for the doctor's office, right? So it's
Right.
kind of like each child has their own interests and you're just trying to support them where they're at, but also like not putting too much pressure, but you can also encourage. And what I mean by that is like I had a child who wasn't really interested in doing peer interaction, was actually very
Mm.
physical, had language, but was very physical. And a lot of the children would kind of shy away from that child, and so so then once the doctor's office came, he became the patient.
Mhm.
And so then the other kids, started to want to engage with him. And so from there, he felt like he's part of the community. But before that, before we started this project approach and talking about the doctor's office and something he had knowledge of from his personal experiences of being hospitalized as when he was younger and different things like that and surgeries he had, it was like he became an expertise, right? So
Yeah,
he was, on the doctor's bed and kind of telling them what to do, but then he was able to engage in his with his peers, and he was able to um, work towards one of his goals, which was peer interaction. Whereas before, trying to figure that part out and balance the classroom was a little bit tricky.
for sure. That's a great example. When you think about advice for somebody who might be considering the project approach or wanting to try it out in their classroom or a future classroom, what would you suggest that they consider? What advice would you give?
Be patient with yourself. It's a learning experience. It's trial and error. It's okay to, not really know what you're doing. Because when I first started, I was really confused. I was like, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? And I even remember that I felt so proud when Lillian Katz told me, like, yes, you're doing a great job. Like to hear it from her, I was like,
Mhm.
oh, like that's
Right.
so, I felt so good, but I didn't feel that confident with my project.
Mhm.
But getting that, that positive feedback from her, I was like, oh, okay. And she told me, she said, sometimes your project is going to work and sometimes it's not going to work. And
Right.
so I think that has kind of carried me through,
Mhm.
knowing that I don't have to be right. It's not really a right or a wrong way to do the project. It's kind of just following the interest of the children, and it's not as hard as it may seem. I know that people sometimes have the concern of, well, what if my children aren't showing any interest, or what if I don't know what to do? I think that kind of putting things out there and seeing if they take interest to it, because you're going to have someone usually who kind of has, like I said, like an interest. And I'm just going back to doctors again because I've talked about it. That that came from the children. It came, I think it stemmed from, I believe it stemmed from a book that a child's reading at nap time, and then it's like, oh, I have doctors too, and it kind of just went from there. So I think be patient, and there's no, like, some people think about everything in time frames, like I have to get this done by this time. And I thought with the project approach, it's more lax because it can happen over a period of time. There's no real ending time. Like the children will show you kind of when they're done, and you'll kind of have that feeling of like, okay, we're done. We can either move on to another project or we can take a break in between. But it's really, to me, children driven. And so I believe that as a teacher, supporting your children where they are is very important. And I think being patient with yourself.
That's great advice, Indica. Is there anything else that you want to share when you just think about individuals that are in this class and they're learning about project approach and preschool interventions?
I would think about, I would say, once again, just building on your children's strengths. I think sometimes we focus on how we need to support children in the classroom. We start to focus on what we need to do and we can get overwhelmed. But I think that children come in with strengths. All children have strengths. And I feel like that focusing on that will also help, the classroom run more smoothly, but also help the project approach flow more smoothly for everyone. And I think getting people on board, like, like letting your families know, you know, what you're working on, and having them to be involved too. I know that we're in a different time right now, so things look a little bit different, but I feel like the project approach really built a sense of community. And so I felt that, not only did it build a sense of community in my classroom, but it also built a sense of community in the physical community because we got to go out and go on field trips and things like that as well. And I remember the doctor's office were like, "How's the project going?" They're really excited to help, and people want to be helpful in that way. I feel like, and then also with the families, like they were really excited. It wasn't like anything extra they were sitting home if they had, just like, if you guys have been with the doctor, or if you see something, and then I was getting emails from the parents saying, "Oh, like my kid went to the doctor, or they saw this and they wanted to share with you. We took the dog to the vet. Our dog got sick, and we wanted to share this with you." And so it just became a very exciting time for everyone, and it didn't feel stressful.
For sure. Well, thank you, Indica. I super appreciate you just sharing your expertise with us. All right.